Doctors and nurses, what was the creepiest last words you heard from a patient right before they died? Cardiac ICU had a gentleman who was DNR on comfort care. He was demented and was cursing like a sailor. He seemed to have moments of clarity and would ask to see his brothers, who were both passed. After a particularly worrisome heart rhythm, he went back into a sinus tachycardia and looked me in the eyes and said, "Hey, what's your name?" "My name?" "What do you do here?" "I'm a nurse." After this, he was quiet for some time. Then he said, "F you." And then he died about 20 minutes later. I mean, if you're going to go out, might as well go guns blazing. F you, F the world. There's no ramifications at that point, right? Next story. I work in a cardiac ICU. We had a patient who had a pulmonary artery rupture, a rare but known complication of a Swan-Ganz catheter. 1 minute, he was joking around with us, and the next, bright red blood was spewing out of his mouth. His last words before he died were, "Why is this happening to me?" It still haunts me years later. Next story. I'm a nurse and was previously working at an assisted living community on the dementia/Alzheimer's unit. My very favorite patient had been declining pretty steadily, so I was checking on him very frequently. We would have long chats and joke around with each other, but in the last 2 weeks of his life, he stopped talking completely and didn't really acknowledge conversation directed at him at all. I finished my medication rounds for the evening and went to see him before I left. I told him I was leaving for the night and that I'd see him the following day, and he looked me in the eyes and smiled so genuinely and said, "You look like an angel." I thought it was so sweet because he had not seemed lucid in weeks. He died the next morning. It really messed with me. Next story. Nurse here. I had a patient come into the ER with shortness of breath. He started deteriorating in the ER, and then, quite rapidly, on the transport up the ICU. We got him wheeled into his room, replaced the ER lines and tubes with our own, and transferred him from the transport stretcher to his ICU bed. He actually did most of the transfer himself, didn't say anything, but before he died, he pleasantly adjusted his own pillow, laid his head down, and then his eyes went blank. This man just made himself comfortable before laying down to die. Next story. I don't care that I'm not a nurse, but this was said by my dad to the nurse, so close enough. Backstory. My dad had MS. He'd had it since he was 18, diagnosed at 20, married my mom at 24, had me at 29, died 15 days short of 45. 6 months before that, he was put on hospice. He and Mom were discussing funeral arrangements, and my mom jokingly said, "You know, Tim, the best thing you could do would be to die on a Wednesday. That way, we can have the body prepared on Thursday, the viewing on Friday, and the memorial on Saturday, so more people could come." The morning we got the call that it was time, my mom, 2 sisters, and I were about 5 minutes too late. After we said our goodbyes, the nurse pulled my mom aside and asked if that day had any significance. It's not even 6 a.m. yet, so Mom doesn't even know what day it is, much less if it's important. The nurse tells her it's May 21st. No, nothing is coming to mind. The nurse told her that the previous day he kept asking what day it was, and they tell him it was the 20th. He'd look irritated, but accept it. That morning he asked what day it was, and they said it's Wednesday, May 21st. He smiled, squeezed his favorite nurse's hand, and was gone almost immediately. It was Memorial Day weekend, and we did just as he and Mom had planned. And despite many friends being out of town for the holiday, we had over 250 people show up at the memorial service, overflowing the tiny church more than it had ever been filled. To his dying day, he was trying to make things easier for our family. I miss him. Tragic but touching and sweet at the same time. That's very poetic. The fact that they mentioned that, they talked about him jokingly passing on a Wednesday, and he held on specifically just so that he could do that for his family. Amazing. Next story. I found one of my comfort measures only patients at the side of his bed. It surprised me because he had been mostly unresponsive during my shift. I helped him back into bed, and he asked me why all these people were in his room. He suddenly became quiet again, and I noticed he wasn't breathing. He was a DNR, so there wasn't anything to do to try to bring him back. Looking back, he may have been talking about me and the CNA that was helping me get him back into bed, but who knows what or who he was seeing in the last minutes of his life. Still creeps me out a little when I think about it. Next story. DNR patient was on comfort cares, was on a high dose of morphine and hallucinating. She would alternate between grasping for things not there and trying to climb out of bed. She was too unsteady to walk, so my job was to sit in the room and make sure she was safe. She tried to get up, and I went to ask her what she needed. She grabbed my arm and pulled me down towards her face and said, very angrily, "Kill me." That one effed with me for a while. Next story. Checked in on a patient before the end of my shift, and she was in good spirits. Had been joking with me the whole time. Her condition was tenuous, new trach, but she had been positive throughout. I asked how she was doing, and she replied by saying, "The old gray mare ain't what she used to be," and she wished me a good night. I came in the next morning, and she had coded and died overnight. Next story. Not a nurse, not a doctor, but I'm an apprentice funeral director. We went to a nursing home on a removal, and as we were walking down the hall, one of the patients got antsy and opened the door to his room and saw us walking with the stretcher. "I'll see you next week, boys." And guess who we had to pick up the next week? Next story. Came into an early shift and was handed over a patient who'd been very anxious and had a panic attack overnight. He was anxious all morning, but OBS all fine, ECG fine, and so I just asked someone to sit with him to keep an eye on him and reassure him for me. He gets worse. Really panicky, heavy breathing. He's on his side in the fetal position. Doctors will be in 10 minutes, so I tell him I'll get them to him as soon as they come in, but ask if he'll lie on his back for me to help his breathing. He tells me he won't make it until they get there and that he won't face the other way. OBS still all fine at this point, but he's more agitated, so again I suggest he move positions for comfort, and that's when he says, "I won't make it till the doctors get here. If I turn to face the other way, I'll die." He repeated this a few times to me. He arrested literally as the doctors walked in, and he died on the side he'd been refusing to turn to. I'm convinced he knew. Next story. Not a doctor or a nurse, but my grandfather was on hospice care at home for 2 days. He told us that he had to go with the little red-haired girl. We didn't know what he was talking about. When he died, we cleaned him up and called the hospice nurse on duty, who came right over. I happened to be the one to answer the door, and there she stood, 5'2" or so, with gorgeous blue eyes and the most beautiful red hair you've ever seen. I couldn't even manage hello, but my grandmother looked around me and said very cheerfully, "Please come in, he's been waiting for you." Next story. My first hospice case, she was on morphine and started mock smoking. She looked at me, took my hand and said, "Please," in the most pleading voice I've ever heard. I sat with her body until the coroner arrived. She has no friends or family, only her lawyer showed up. I've only done one hospice case since. Next story. I had a patient who had a stroke. After that, he recovered fine, but did get pneumonia like 4 weeks into his recovery. The last words he said to me was at like 4 a.m. "You took his girl and you will burn in hell for it." I actually took a girlfriend from a friend of mine. Somehow he knew. Next story. I actually have 3 that stick out in my mind. An 83-year-old woman that said, "My mom's here. Are we going?" She died a few minutes later. An older lady said, "I think I'm going to die today." We took vitals. Everything seemed fine. She was stable. She had a heart attack a couple hours later. Not her last words, but the last she ever said to me. The last one is definitely the creepiest. A nice old lady who told my CNA she wanted to wear all white. When asked why, she said, "The man in black is here." She looked in the corner of the room. The CNA looked, but there was no one there. That's when I came into the room. We asked her to describe what she was seeing, and she said, "He's in all black. He's got a top hat on." Then she whispered, "And his eyes are red," while her eyes moved across the room to directly behind the CNA, like she was watching him move closer to us. She died later that night, but it was unexpected. That room creeped me out for a long time after that. Next story. I'm working on my mother's eulogy for tomorrow's wake. I'm going to go into detail for anyone that's smoking because I think it's something you should reconsider. My mom was diagnosed with terminal lung and pancreatic cancer. Mass had developed around her vocal cords and made it hard for her to speak. She smoked all her life, and it finally caught up with her. It attacked her quick, from the time she was diagnosed to the time she passed away. It was less than 2 weeks. First, she lost her voice. Then she had difficulty breathing, became weak, and she couldn't walk too far. Then she could only walk a little. Then nothing at all. She had trouble eating. The night she died, I let her smoke her cigarette. Doctor said it didn't matter anymore, and my sister and I took Mom into her bed, and I knew, as did my sister, it was the last time. We spent a few hours with her, holding her, and I got up, lost it a bit, and my mom said, "Don't be sad," loudly, with all her might. I was fortunate to be with my mother at that time. She was due to have hospice that Monday, but she did not make it. Lung cancer kills quickly. I hope none of you have to deal with that. Consider it that next cigarette. It's just a matter of time. Well, enough preaching. Next story. My first code as a nurse was of a middle-aged mother who we think ended up having a brain bleed. I was trying to check her vitals, and she was super agitated and had been all day. She managed to bend her IV pole somehow. She was ripping her gown off and the sheets off the bed, and she'd yanked her heart monitor off. I was trying to start a blood transfusion, but needed to get her vitals beforehand, which was impossible because she wouldn't stay long enough for any of it to read. I'd given her a sedative for what I thought was anxiety, and I was praying it would kick in soon. She kept grabbing my arm, saying, "Come here, look at me, help me," with fear in her eyes that I'll never forget. I'm pretty sure I snapped back, "I'm trying," which I, of course, wish was something comforting instead. Then she leaned back, her eyes got droopy, she shut her mouth, then snapped her eyes wide open but totally glossed over. She took one last breath as a coworker was helping me while I called the code. Next story. I've commented this somewhere before, but it stayed with me. I'm an RN, and while I was a student, I was caring for a lady who had end-stage renal failure, had a DNAR, and was shutting down. We were having a little chat. Well, I was chatting away while helping her put on some lotion when she stopped, looked over my shoulder and said, "Bill's here, love. I've got to go," and swiftly stopped breathing. Read her old notes, and Bill was her deceased husband. Next story. Not a nurse or doctor, but my beloved grandpa was in the hospital, ill with pneumonia and sepsis. I thought he would recover. He was asking to see me and my family, so I went with my parents, my husband, and my 2 little boys. Grandpa couldn't talk, but he was lucid and was watching TV in his room. He motioned for a pen and paper. He scribbled something on a scrap of paper and gave it to my oldest boy, who was about 12 at the time. It said, "I love you." When we were leaving the hospital, it hit me that Grandpa was saying goodbye, and I started to bawl like a baby. Grandpa had passed before I got home. He held on just to see me and my boys one more time. I still see him in my dreams, only he isn't the sick old man I had known since my grandma died in 1977. He's about 40, in the prime of his life. He's healthy and strong, taking long, energetic strides across the front yard of the house he shared with my grandma for 45 years. I've never known him to look like that, and yet there he is, popping in to say hello. Next story. I'm a CST, Certified Surgical Tech, in a specialized area of surgery that sees mostly people who are up there in age. This is more of a general observation than a specific story about a patient, but more than once I've been one of the last people to see someone's loved one conscious or even alive. I never forget the ones that tell us about how they should have come in earlier, or how they were scared and in a lot of pain before being put under by anesthesia. I've also experienced seemingly lower risk patients never open their eyes again. Anyways, tell your loved ones how you feel. You never know if you may not see them again. Next story. My dad fell into unconsciousness around noon. We managed to get him into bed, and he responded with a hand squeeze when I said, "I love you." We watched and waited the rest of the day. Around 3 a.m., his breathing changed, and as his breathing became more and more labored, he bolted upright, eyes wide open, looked at his wife, my sister, then me, smiled, exhaled, and died. Next story. I'm a hospital chaplain. When I was a CPE intern, a greenhorn, I went to see a patient in the ICU who had 10 to 12 oranges on her table. We talked about oranges for about 20 minutes, and then she said, "Something's going to happen." I went to check on her the next day, and the nurse mentioned that she passed the previous night. I asked if anyone else talked with her, and she said no, so the last conversation she had was about oranges with me. I kind of wish we talked about something else. However, the nurse said that was a worthy conversation that the patient wanted to talk about. It made me feel better. Yeah, I think something casual and light like this definitely hits the mark a little bit better than just this deep, inflective conversation about like the deeper meanings of life and all of that. I think that this lady, without even knowing her, this is how she would have wanted to go out. Next story. I was in the army in Pakistan for humanitarian support after an earthquake. There is a very serious school bus crash when a road gave and there was a dozen kids that were The first kid that we took off the ambulance and put on the stretcher to carry into the triage tent said, more like screamed, something in Udru. When we got there, the doc asked the translators what he said. It was, "The spiders are eating Papa." We all just looked at each other for a second, then just proceeded with triage. Next story. Not really creepy, but you'd be surprised how quickly patients in death's door will pass when they've had a final moment with their loved ones. One of my professors in nursing school called it permission to die. No one wants to see their loved ones go, but when the inevitable is at hand, it's better to send them off with good feelings. Don't let your loved ones feel guilty for leaving you behind. Let them rest in peace. Next story. I was a hospice nurse for many years. Super gratifying job for a nurse. Surprisingly, as a regular nurse, you're rarely offered thanks. Hospice nursing is an island unto itself, mostly peaceful, lots of times sad, often a blessing. This is sad, but also creepy, and I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it. Had a 20-year-old kid, gang member, who was dying of primary liver cancer. Super unusual, aggressive, and terminal. He was angry at the universe. His family was there to comfort him, but he literally spit in their faces. Every ounce of energy he had left was angry and mean and ugly. His mom would beg him to lighten up and accept Jesus into his heart. He would swing at her and tell her to F herself. The family remained beside, in hopes he would chill out at the end. His last day, hours, moments, he was angry. The family called me into the room and told me they thought he was going. He wasn't responding. Chine Stokes' breaths, eyes glossy and skin cold. The end was imminent. His lovely mother, in her dearest attempt, whispered to him to go towards the light, to her Jesus. With his dying breath, he opened his eyes, looked at her, and said, "F your Jesus." A second or two later, he slowly turned his head to the left and got the most horrific look on his face, as if he was looking at something we couldn't see. And horrified, like in a bad movie, his face contorted, and he screamed with his last breath, eyes wide, "Oh crap, oh crap, oh no!" Then made a guttural noise and promptly fell back into the bed and died. Every family member was shaking and too frightened to speak, and I left the room and took 2 days off. I don't care if I never found out what he saw. Next story. My grandma died in 1989, and my grandfather, Bob, died around 1965. She never remarried, never dated, but she did have a great life. When she was dying, she yelled, "Bob, Bob, here I come. Oh, honey, I've missed you so much." We always joked that we were glad she didn't yell, "Bob, who the hell is that?" Next story. I may have told this one before. This is how I remember it. It was years ago. I was a junior resident. I didn't know the patient all that well, but got called up to get her paperwork ready for discharge. She was an otherwise healthy, 96 or so, had a palliative colon resection for cancer, something. I went to her room to do a last wound check and DC a JP drain, and she kept talking about how she was, quote, going home to Bill. Her son pointed out that she's usually mentally very sharp, but Bill was her husband who had died years ago. He reassured her, "No, Mom, Dad is gone. We're just going back to the house." She insisted, "No, I'm going to him. He came to see me this morning and said he's taking me home." Whatever, I guess. The son said that she was otherwise at baseline. It was the first and only weird thing she said. Vitals and labs looked good, so we progressed along the DC pathway. Not even a few minutes later, the code blue got called to her room. She was don't code, so we didn't do anything, but it was like, WTAF, I guess Bill really was coming for her. Her son was surprisingly okay with how this played out. This one chilled me for a while. Names changed to protect the innocent, and let's face it was like 10 years ago, and I don't remember anyway. Next story. I was staying with my grandma on a cot next to her bed as she was actively passing. She didn't say much for the last few days. I got off a shift at about 11 p.m., went home to say goodnight to the dog and GF, and was up to her place by about 1. I felt like it may be the last night, so I just knelt down by her and told her how much I loved her and how it was going to be okay to go. It was her time, and she's been a wonderful matriarch to her family. I tried to stay awake, but drifted off after that. The CNA woke me at around 4 a.m. to tell me she was gone. I alternate between guilt for falling asleep and being grateful to be there in general. Flufferold, I miss her. She didn't say anything to me, so not relevant to this post, I guess, but it feels good to write this for some reason. Next story. 4th year MD student here. Haven't heard too many creepy things. A lot of the patients that are close to the end aren't in great talking shape. Not all of them, but most from my experience. Creepiest thing, though, we had a guy in his early 70s who was just a train wreck of health problems. Normally, Occam's razor brings cause of death down to one worsening cause. This guy had metastatic melanoma, really bad multiple myeloma, lung cancer that had metastasized, 3 different cancers at the same time. He weighed maybe 80 pounds. Hear a code blue over the PA system, and the whole team shows up. Chest compressions, epinephrine. We get a pulse back after 3 minutes or so. The guy's chest was destroyed by compressions. There was trouble getting a good line into the vein, so I think they drilled into his skin. Catastrophically painful if you're awake. Dude opens his eyes and looks around a bit. Looks scared as hell. Can't speak or really move, but looked terrified. His nurse, standing in the corner for the whole time, pipes up, not sarcastically. He told me he was DNR. The family put the legal stuff in a folder on the chair. We pushed morphine and covered him up, redid his gown. I held his hand until the resident declared him. First death I ever saw. Dead people are cold, just really, really cold. No one had ever told me that. Something somewhere went wrong and his computer file hadn't been updated. Only that nurse knew because he and the family had told her. I cannot, to this day, think or understand why she didn't scream at anybody showing up in the room not to touch him or at least look for the folder with his living will in it. She and whoever, doctor, nurse, secretary, whoever that screwed up that charting mistake should be raked over the coals. The family seemed pretty understanding of the mistake, but if they wanted a lawsuit, it would have been a deserved slam dunk. Never gonna forget the way he looked around, though. I hope he was disoriented. That would be a horrible reality to have on your mind as you moved on. On a lighter note, bumped into a kid from high school at the gas station years ago. We chatted for a couple minutes, and as he headed out, his last words to me were, "We're going to the titty bar." Died as the unrestrained passenger in a car crash that night. He and his buddies were trying to catch air in a car by going over some hump in the road. Crashed into a retaining wall. He was a nice dude. Next story. Can't write this without sobbing, but 3 years ago, my grandma passed. She was stubborn as she could be, and the hospice nurse kept telling us, it won't be long now. Anytime, anytime. So there were about 20 of us, her kids and grandkids, her 80-year-old sister, standing around the bed. It became quite uncomfortable, all of us just standing there holding hands and waiting. So finally, I went over to her and whispered in her ear that I loved her and it was okay for her to go. She and I were very, very close. After that, my mom did the same thing, then my grandma's sister. After a while my mom said, I remember a long time ago, she told me she figured she would hear I'll Fly Away, her favorite hymn, as she entered heaven's gates. Everyone kind of chuckled, and my 80-year-old great-aunt a few minutes later softly started singing, "One glad morning when this life is over, I'll fly away. To a home on God's celestial shore, I'll fly away." And without missing a beat, all of us joined in as best as we could. We were all crying, "I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away." At the top of the verse, of course, we were all just sobbing. Not 10 minutes later did her heart stop forever. She just needed some help to fly away. Never got to share that before. Thanks. Well, yes, thank you for sharing, and if I butchered that hymn, I am so sorry, but that is definitely a touching story. I just don't know it. Next story. I'm not a nurse or doctor, but this thread reminded me of what happened with my grandparents. While my grandpa was visiting my grandma in the hospital after she suffered a stroke, he himself had a massive heart attack. He miraculously survived, and they put both of them in a shared hospital room. My grandpa was very weak and eventually passed away. Minutes before his death, however, my grandma proclaimed, "I'm dying," as if she could feel him slipping away. She lived another month before joining him. Next story. My grandfather's brother. He died exactly 6 hours after my grandfather, and just minutes before he died, he said, "I'm going to see you again, brother." He didn't know at the time that my granddad, his brother, had died. The family were going to tell him the next morning because he was having a bad day. Next story. Not final words, but action. I was a first-year med student at the time, and as part of our clinical rotations, they farmed us out to learn how to do history and physicals on whomever would agree to give up an hour of time to chat with somebody who clearly didn't know their arse from their elbow and wouldn't be able to help them with anything. So largely it was the chronics awaiting placement who agreed. I was interviewing an octogenarian status post-dynamic hip screw who was awaiting transfer to rehab. We were plodding through the checklist that comprised my review of systems at the time when he stopped mid-sentence and looked over my shoulder towards the door as though somebody had entered the room. I cast a quick glance to see who it was, but there was nobody there. I looked back and his gaze was fixed and his mouth was quivering slightly, and then he died. Boom. 1 second talking and the next dead. Massive PE, saddle embolus. I don't think I've seen somebody die so suddenly since, and I reflect on that look. The specter of death had been right there, hovering over my left shoulder. I still think about the look in his eyes. He saw it, and he knew. Next story. Working as a secretary in ICU nearly 20 years ago, there is a mid-30s patient who was full-blown AIDS and was in ICU as a DNR. Sort of contradictory, but there you go. Anyway, I can't remember if it was pneumonia or something else that landed him in ICU, but I do remember when things started falling apart, instead of coding him, the nurses were coming in with drugs to relax him and make him comfortable. Out of nowhere, he changed his mind about the DNR and started screaming, "I don't want to die yet. Please do something." So they called the code, but in the end, he didn't make it. Next story. Grandfather died this year at 86. He was in Nashville in a hospital for pneumonia. I was working and was going to go down there the next day to see him. My mother called me and said he was passing soon and if I wanted to talk to him. I said yes, and this was the conversation verbatim. Me. "Hey, Papa, it's Marky. How's it going?" Grandfather. "I'm sick." Me. "Can you hang on for a few more hours and I'll be there?" Grandfather. "Nope, I'm out of here." Me. "I love you." Grandfather. "All right." He died before the phone hung up. Really bothered me with how accepting he was of his own death. I think about it every day. Next story. My brother died just a little over 2 years ago from cancer. He was a medical doctor. I'm a PhD in history, so I guess we've got it covered. As we were in the hospice room for the hospital, my friend came in to visit on Steve's last day. Steve says, My heart is under the TV in my room." Bob goes, "It's cool, man. Don't worry about it." "No, my heart. It's under the TV." He died later that night. Couple days later, we were gathering up his stuff and found his stash of pot under his TV. LOL. He seemed to want to tell my friend because that's who was procuring pot for him. Never smoked before he was diagnosed and had fun with that during his treatment. Yeah, like if you know you're on the way out, I guess at that point, all bets are off. Let's smoke. Let's live life to the fullest of, what we have left. So mad respect there. Next story. I'm not a doctor or nurse, but I'll share. My grandmother on her deathbed dying from cancer. The afternoon she passed, she sat up in her hospital bed and asked my father for a Mountain Dew. She never drank soda. My father loved the stuff. My dad went to the vending machine in the hospital and got them both a soda, and they both drank it, even with the hole in her throat. She drank the soda and said something along the lines of, "Wow, that's delicious," and passed away. I tear up every time I drink a Dew. Next story. The guy was gobbling down his breakfast and was refusing to have his blood glucose checked. And we knew that he would need insulin because of his history. I expressed my concern and he told me, "I've faced death many times before. He's nearly blind, missing a few digits. You get the picture." I came back 30 minutes later to check on him. He was unconscious and turning nearly blue. We coded him and recovered him to the ICU, basically brain dead. They pulled the plug on him a week later. Turned out he had choked on a piece of egg from the breakfast he was eating. Maybe not a real creepy story. Next story. I had a patient in my first week of being on a hospital floor as a CNA. She was really sweet and wanted to know all about my nursing school. Right before she went to bed, I helped her move from the chair in the room. She jokingly danced with me for a few seconds, humming an old tune before sitting on the bed. She thanked me as she drifted off to sleep. "Don't worry, it will be okay," referring to my trepidation about the new job, I assume. She was scheduled to go home and died from a complication of medications about 4 hours later. The first song on the radio that morning as I got in my car was Shut Up and Dance. Yeah, that messed with me for a long time. Next story. Surgeon here. Not sure if this is creepy, but a man on his deathbed kept repeating, "The body is in the woods next to the oak tree," over and over until he passed. The police were notified and they did search some woods behind the man's house, but never found anything. Next story. Warning, long post ahead. My grandfather had always known when he was going to die. He always said that he was dying on May 26th at 12 in the afternoon. Towards the end, he kept telling us that his time was coming, that he was nearing the end of his life. The morning of May 26th, he calls my dad at about 8 a.m. They have about an hour-long conversation. No one knows details. My dad doesn't want to tell what they talked about. My dad says at 9 a.m., my grandfather said this, "I'm not feeling great. I'm going to go get a snack and take a nap, so I'll see you on the other side." An hour later, we get a call from my grandfather's girlfriend. He died at 10 o'clock in his sleep after eating half a can of Pringles. About 5 years later, my dad starts saying the same kind of stuff. He'd had really bad problems during this time, so he's not in the best health. He's always going on about how he knows he's dying on October 10th. He goes on and on about it. That morning, October 10th, he says that he doesn't feel good and that he doesn't want to do anything. Not typical for my dad. Well, he goes on through the day anyway. Later that day, he has to go to a dinner party for work. Him and my mom are leaving, and he says to me, "Well, I'll see you on the other side. I love you." That night, him and my mom get back, and he goes straight to bed. Doesn't say anything to me or anyone. The rest is what my mom said happened that night. He was sitting in the edge of the bed in his pajamas, mumbling to himself. I asked him what was wrong, and all I can understand is that he has to use the bathroom. He got up, walked to his toilet, sat down, and fell over dead. All I saw was blood everywhere, and the only thing I could think was to call Thomas, my brother. A couple of minutes later, my brother shows up and drags my dad through the house and out to the truck. There's blood everywhere, and my dad was dead. My brother drives home to the nearest hospital and is slapping my dad back to life. Throughout the 15-minute drive, my dad dies 3 more times, and my brother slaps him awake again. He was in the ICU for 2 weeks. When he was healthy enough to be transferred, he was moved to a bigger hospital where they put a stent in his liver that saved his life. He's completely fine now, but if we had waited for an ambulance or if my brother hadn't been there, my dad would have died that night, just like he said he would have. TLDR, my dad and grandfather were psychics. Next story. Not a medical professional, but my dad was dying at home and had been pretty out of it for a few days. The few times he was conscious, he would talk about all the people in his room and that they were climbing the walls, staring at him from under the bed, generally crazy crap. The last thing he said before the end was to my sister, "Are you going to bury me today?" Totally effed all of us up. He died the next day. Next story. My neighbor and longtime friend developed a lung issue, but was doing well enough to be taken off her breathing machine. She was on the mend when things went south. She waited for her family to gather to say goodbye. When that was done, she looked at her daughter and said, "Grad school," then passed. Her last thought was for her girl's future. Her daughter is graduating soon with that degree, and I really miss that fun, crazy woman. Next story. Not a nurse or doctor, but this thread reminded me of when my great-grandmother died a few years ago. We got the news she was unresponsive and put into hospice. We drove 12 hours to see her, and as we're walking in, they stop us and tell us she just passed within the last few minutes. So my parents and brother and aunt were gathering themselves, but I just rushed in because somehow I knew she wasn't gone. I sat down beside her and took her hand. She took 2 long breaths, and she was still. She seemed to have waited for me to come in. Still not the creepiest part, though. After they had moved her into the goodbye room and we said our goodbyes, we all moved to the den where there's a piano and radio. We were all talking, and not even 5 minutes standing around, the radio comes on and plays an older song my aunt said she loved. Next story. Quick backstory. I was 6 when my uncle was killed by a drunk driver. 10 when my best friend was killed by a drunk driver, her father. Now to my mom. I was 15. She was dying of cancer at home. I was petrified of dying up until her death. So the day she dies, I come home from school. My mom tells me this is it. Go talk to her while she makes phone calls to my uncle and aunt and my pop to come home. It's time. When I was with her, she was normal talking and joking. She hadn't been that way in a while. My mom comes back, and my mom is adamant that my mom has to go to the store to get her whatever it is that she wanted. My mom didn't want to leave, but she did for her. Mind you, my mom is home, not hospital. So out the window, I see my mom heading to the car as the rest of the family shows up. She was talking to us and everything. Then she goes to sleep. Deep sleep, not responsive, but breathing. Now I look out the window and my mom is parking the car. My mom wakes up but isn't looking at us. She sees something else. She calls out her brother's name with a shocked look on her face and moments later died in peace. The brother she called out to has been dead for years, but to watch her reaction made me believe there is an afterlife and people aren't alone. My mom comes walking up the steps as my mom took her last breath. I believe for some reason she didn't want my mom there. For me, it made me believe in more to this day, 21 years later. I'm not afraid to die. Next story. I'm a CNA, but this isn't about a patient. My fiance's grandfather passed away back in January. When my fiance and I got together, I became responsible for helping his pop get to the doctor. He went into the doctor for various reasons, and we were told he was in congestive heart failure and that this was the end. The hospital was an hour away from where we live, and we both were working full-time, so we were traveling back and forth. We slept in the truck in the parking lot one night, so we were the first ones to see him that morning. He was in ICU, so only 2 at a time could be in his room. He was still sleeping when we got into his room, so I pulled up a chair and laid my head down by his leg and went back to sleep. My fiance went for coffee, and when he got back, him and his pop started talking. Pop was in and out of it at this point, mostly singing old hymns and pleading for God to take him home. One of the last things I heard him say was, "You've got a good one here. Don't let her go." He was rubbing the top of my head as he said it. I didn't grow up with grandparents, and he was the closest thing to a grandfather I had. The very last thing I heard him say was, "I love you too." We made sure to tell him we loved him before leaving the room for anything, and he replied every time until he finally fell into a deep sleep and never woke again. God knows I miss that man. Next story. Not really creepy, but most of these aren't anyway. My uncle was a sailor, loved the sea. He wasn't going to get better, so he asked to be taken off life support and brought to hospice. The next day at hospice, he asked to go outside to look at the water. It was a nice sunny day with a breeze. He looked out to the water and took his last breath. It was like he'd planned it. It was a good death. Next story. I'm not a nurse or doctor. Neither of these are someone's last words, but it's relevant. My grandfather's brother had all sorts of visions when he was alive. He's not the only one who's dying in this story, but he wasn't what you'd call a psychic. So the morning after his father died, my great-grandfather, my grandfather went to go tell him. He was a few cities away. He just responded with, "I know, I saw the angels take him last night." Coincidence? Probably. Creepy? Definitely. Edit. My grandfather's last words were, "I have to go. They're here." Gestures to empty doorway, smiling. Next story. The devil has been in my room all night, but don't worry, God is with you. This man had like the worst death ever, too. He had a horrendous seizure and died with his eyes wide open and had a horrible grimace on his face. He had also been yelling all night about the devil and saying over and over, "Get out of here. This building's gonna blow." Next story. Oncology nurse here. This will probably get buried. However, I know myself and my colleagues have had multiple patients tell us, "I'm going to die today." Sure enough, most of them that say that actually end up passing or coding that day. It freaks me out when patients say that. They just know something isn't right. Next story. Not a doctor or nurse. My grandmother was in hospice care for brain cancer. She had been there for 5 days and unresponsive for 3. My aunts, uncles, father, and I stayed in her hospice room for these 5 days, drinking beer and chatting. My aunt stayed with her at night and rarely left her side. One morning, her husband came to get her so she could have a break and get some coffee. Before my aunt left, she kissed my grandmother on the cheek, as we all did when we left, and said, "Love you, Mom. I'll see you soon." My grandmother squeezed her hand and said, "Goodbye." Graham passed within minutes of them leaving. Next story. I worked in a secured Alzheimer's unit, and one of my 99-year-old residents rolled up on me in her wheelchair and said, "Can I use your phone, honey? I want to call my son before I die today." I said, "No, Granny," what everyone called her. "You aren't going to die today." I let her use my phone anyways. After dinner, one of the CNAs asked if I had seen her so they could put her in bed. I said no and helped them look for her. Turns out she had laid down in an unaccompanied room and died that evening. I was never more happy that I had let a resident use my phone to call a family member. Next story. My grandpa passed a week ago after being in hospice for a few days. He was already unconscious by the time I got there, but doctors and nurses told me he could still hear everything. So I at least got to say what I needed to him. My grandpa was, to put it mildly, not that religious, but some members of my family are. So a priest came to the hospice to meet and confer with us. After discussing plans for his service, the priest took my grandma's hands, bowed his hands, and said, "Let us pray." And as soon as he said that, my grandpa started yelling and moaning and thrashing around in his bed. He was effing pissed off. It was such a dark, sad time, and he managed to make it hilarious. I miss him. Next story. Paramedic. I had a guy in my ambulance go into VFib, a lethal rhythm. I saw it happen on the heart monitor, and so did he. And before he lost consciousness, he looked at me and said, "But I can't see the light." I worked him, shocked him, transported him to the ED, but he died without regaining consciousness. Next story. ER physician here had heard many last words from patients, but the creepiest one has to be one of a man who, on his last breaths, as he succumbed to renal failure, he said, quote, "I see a bright light, horses, no, eyes, no, no, no!" as he loudly yelled, and at this point he was crashing when he suddenly woke up, looked up with his last breath and said, "I understand," and he died. We know in the medical field that these situations are provoked by a cascade of neurotransmitters in disarray due to tissue and organ failure, but I sometimes have my doubts, and perhaps we're seeing more than we're led to believe. Next story. My grandpa died from diabetes complications at home after having a leg taken. However, my uncle, his youngest, was working in another country. We told him, "Okay, Papa, you have to wait for Bruce to get here." He asked how long. We said about 17 hours. The last words I heard him say were, "17 hours, huh? That's a long time, but okay." He went unresponsive after that, and he died literally 20 minutes after my uncle got there and got to have some time to say goodbye. He waited, and he's a badass for that. Yeah, certainly is a badass move, knowing that it's going to cause additional strain and pain and effort, but you do it just for the sake of your family. Gotta love stories like that. Next story. This will probably get buried, but oh well. Maybe getting it out somewhere will help. I'm not a doc or nurse, but I lost my mom a few months ago from complications from COPD and heart failure. Her carbon dioxide levels were rising, and she was on comfort measures with morphine. She had been unresponsive for a bit, and my aunt and I were standing, one on each side of her hospital bed. One of the last things she ever asked us was, "Why is everyone here? What's going on?" while looking into her sister's eyes. My aunt was a trooper, though, and explained how we were trying to make her comfortable because her lungs weren't working anymore. She said, "Oh, okay," like that was the most sensible thing in the world. The only other thing she said after that was a little while later. She said, "He's waiting for me." We'd like to think it was maybe her dad or my aunt's husband who had died the year prior. Who knows? She was gone by 10 a.m. the next morning. Just whatever you do, let your loved ones know you care. My mom had had reoccurring pneumonia, and we had been planning to get her into rehabilitation that week, and she was gone, only 54 years old, so make sure to share the love. Next story. I loved my ex-husband's mom with every ounce of my being. She was this little bitty Greek firestorm, and she didn't like very many people, but she loved me and my girls fiercely. I had the most amazing honor of taking care of her when she was diagnosed with lung cancer. One day, near the close, she asked me, "Who's that little blonde girl running around and smiling and waving at me?" Not one of my girls fit that description. I do believe that she was seeing her sweet guide, and I do so hope the same for me and mine. I do. Next story. Obligatory, not a nurse or doctor, but family. My granny had been mumbling incoherently for hours, as the morphine helped her along. Then, very clearly, she said, "Windstark, I see the dogwoods," and she took her last breath. She loved her some Jesus, and the dogwoods held special significance for her religiously. It kinda scared my atheist self for a bit. Miss you, Granny. Next story. Nurse here. Creepiest thing didn't have to do with talking. Our PT had been unresponsive for days, in the active dying process since that morning. I was gowned and gloved in the room, MRSA precautions for an open wound, and I was standing at the doorway waiting for the CNA to come and help to reposition her. The CNA was getting her gown on, and we were talking, and we heard the PT moving. She jumped out of bed and sprinted headfirst into the wall and crumpled to the ground, bleeding. She hadn't gotten out of bed for a week at least. We covered our bases, and family and doctors were called, and PT died a few days later. I've worked in hospice now for the past 4 years and have never heard of another case like this. On the incident report, there's a space to write ideas for how this incident could have been avoided. That thing beats me. Next story. When I was an aide, I don't remember the exact words because they weren't the creepy part, and I'm glad he got to say goodbye. The man, who had just dropped while walking down the hall, got out that he didn't want to go and told his family he loved them. The nurse asked him if he was ready, and he said no. The thing being, we had lost the last bit of his pulse shortly after getting him back to his bed after the fall, which was from an aortic wall rupture, if I remember right. He wasn't hooked up to an EKG, but as far as we could tell with the stethoscope, all his goodbyes and not being ready were done without a heartbeat. Next story. ER nurse had a middle-aged female patient being rushed back from the WR in a wheelchair. She was clearly about to code by the look of her, pale, diaphoretic, unresponsive to most of us. We began working her quickly and getting her on the monitors, checking pulses, etc. It's a fast-paced, chaotic process, yelling, giving orders, starting IVs, etc. Suddenly, she sits straight up in bed, begins screaming at the top of her lungs, and what I later find out was an Italian while looking around eyes wide, then falls back onto the bed and codes. We didn't get her back. It was straight exorcist-looking crap. I never found out what she said. Next story. I'm a nurse, but this story is one that a patient told me. I promise it's worth the read. She and her husband had an amazing love story. She was a shy German girl, and he was a U.S. soldier in World War II. He and his buddies were out one night, and they found my patient and her friend walking down the road. The guys tried to pick them up, but they thought the boys were just trouble. So the girls told the boys to meet them at a certain spot in town later that night. The girls not only stood the soldiers up, but they watched them from afar. My patient ended up running into one of the soldiers again later, and he finally convinced her to take a chance with him. When he picked her up, he told her family that he was going to marry her someday. Shortly thereafter, he was sent back to the U.S. They wrote letters back and forth for the next few months. They became engaged via letter. He promised he would bring her back to Germany every year, a promise he kept except for 2001 because of 9/11. It took a little over a year for her to be able to come to the States, where her future in-laws had helped get everything ready for the wedding. They finally got married, bought a farm, and stayed side by side for almost 60 years. She said they were never away from each other for more than 24 hours, ever. They had children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. On their wedding anniversary, her husband woke up to go to the bathroom. He leaned over and said to her, "Happy anniversary, I love you," and gave her a kiss. When she woke back up in the morning, he had passed away. Listening to that sweet woman talk about their love and life together, and to hear about his passing, made me break down in tears in the middle of my shift. I'll never forget it. Next story. Not a doctor or nurse story, but it seemed like a good place to share. I was previously married to a man who traveled quite a bit for work. He came home for Christmas, but was feeling quite ill over the holiday, and nothing seemed to make him feel better. I'm not sure what came over me other than a feeling of impending doom, but I couldn't sleep the night before he had to leave again for a short 3-day work trip. I told him I was super worried someone around me, or even myself, was going to die, so I made him stay up to listen to whatever my final wishes were and forced him to tell me his. We didn't have a will. The night before he was due back from his trip, I again had a very strange feeling come over me, and I decided to text him to apologize for any pain, any sadness I had ever caused him in our relationship, a rocky one. He texted back to tell me he had forgiven me long ago and that he loved me. The next day, when he didn't return, I learned from a detective he passed shortly after our last messages. Those last messages prevented a lot of guilty feelings on my end and brought a lot of comfort to me. Always trust your instincts, my friends, and tell those you love how much you love them.